Hi, everyone. So in this video, I'm going to just take a few minutes to explain what you need to do to complete this week's critical thinking issue assignment. Pull it up here. All right, so this week we are covering chapters 6, 7, and 8. So that means you have 3 options to choose from for this week's critical thinking issue assignment. Just like we've been doing, I have all the questions here in the assignment instructions if you just want to copy paste them for the one you have selected, but I've also provided the Word document for each one if that's easier for you to just download the one you're choosing and use that to fill out your answers. All right, so option 1 is obviously the one at the end of chapter 6. Option 2 is the one at the end of chapter 7. And option 3 is the one at the end of chapter 8. And so what is each of those? Well, the Chapter 6 critical thinking issue is perspectives on same-sex marriage. The Chapter 7 critical thinking issue is perspectives on the legalization of recreational marijuana. And the Chapter 8 critical thinking issue is perspectives on the death penalty. Right? So if you are choosing option 1, perspectives on same-sex marriage at the end of Chapter 6, you'll read the introductory information at the beginning of the critical thinking issue section. And then you're going to read a little bit about that court case, the main court case, Obergefell versus Hodges. And you're going to read the majority opinion written by Justice Anthony Kennedy. You're going to answer 4 questions. On what grounds does Kennedy argue for the centrality of marriage to the human condition? 2, how does Kennedy use the ruling in Loving versus Virginia to support his conclusion? 3, what are the 4 principles or premises Kennedy uses to support his conclusion that same-sex marriage should be legal? And 4, what are some of the government benefits associated with marriage, and why, according to Kennedy, does denying those benefits to same-sex couples violate the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment? After you finish those questions, you'll read the second text, which is about the same court case, but this is the dissenting opinion, meaning the justices who did not agree that the court case should prove that same-sex marriage should be legal. It's written by Justice John G. Roberts. So there are 5 questions for this one. First, on what grounds does Roberts argue that same-sex marriage is of no concern to the Supreme Court justices? Second question, according to Roberts, what is the fundamental purpose of marriage? Third question, why does Roberts reject the analogy used in the majority ruling between legalizing interracial marriage and legalizing same-sex marriage? Or how does Roberts respond to the 4 principles and traditions put forth by the majority to support their ruling? And fifth question, on what grounds does Roberts reject the claim that there is a fundamental right to marry? This is an interesting critical thinking issue because we're really getting to see literally both sides. In the others, yes, there's been, you're getting different perspectives, but literally in this case, it is the same court case. And the first text you're reading is from the justices who legalized same-sex marriage based on this court case. And the other text is from the judges who disagreed that it should be federally legalized. It's kind of cool. But after you read both of them, you'll then answer these 2 questions. Roberts opposes legalizing same-sex marriage on a federal level, but supports a state's right to legalize same-sex marriage. Discuss how Justice Thomas might respond to Roberts's argument. Critically analyze both positions. Which position do you support and why? And then our second question. Looking back at your life goals, is or was marriage one of your goals? If so, why? Discuss how you would respond and why if you were legally denied the right to marry because of your sexual orientation, regardless of what it might be. What if you were in a world or in a country where it was illegal? Okay. All right, so that is the critical thinking issue at the end of Chapter 6. If you want to choose option 2, that would be the one at the end of Chapter 7, perspectives on the legalization of recreational marijuana. So you'll read the introductory information at the beginning, And then you'll read Keep Marijuana Illegal by Karen P. Tandy, and you'll answer 4 questions. According to Tandy, why do so many students believe that marijuana is safe for recreational use? 2, what evidence does Tandy use to support her conclusion that smoked marijuana is not medicine? 3, according to Tandy, what have been the effects of legalizing marijuana in other countries? And 4, according to Tandy, what are some of the ways in which marijuana is dangerous to both users and non-users? After you finish up with the first text, you'll read the second one, which is Should Marijuana Be Legalized Under Any Circumstances by Joe Messerly. And you'll have 3 questions for this one. On what grounds does Messerly argue that marijuana should be legal, even if it can be shown marijuana might cause harm to the user? Second question, according to Messerly, what would be some of the positive results of legalizing marijuana? And 3, in Messerly's view, how does keeping marijuana illegal increase the chances of a young person becoming a lifelong criminal? After you've read both, you're going to identify the arguments used in Tandy's and Messerly's articles. Distinguish which arguments are generalizations, analogies, or causal arguments, things we learn about in Chapter 7. Evaluate each of those arguments using the guidelines provided in Chapter 7. 5 steps explained in the section Evaluating Inductive Arguments using Generalization. The 6 steps explained in the section Evaluating Inductive Arguments based on Analogies. And the 4 steps explained in the section Evaluating Causal Arguments. And then I have a chart down here that you can either fill out directly or just use as your guide to evaluate both articles. Looking at the arguments you pointed out in the previous question, which of the arguments is most convincing and why overall? And one of the arguments for the legalization of recreational marijuana in the United States is that the prohibition of alcohol from 1919 to 1933, increased crime and forced up the price of liquor. In addition, the illegality of marijuana in the United States puts its growth and distribution under the control of organized crime, whereas if it were sold by licensed businesses, it could be regulated and taxed. So think about those arguments and first discuss how Tandy would respond to this argument, then how Messerly would likely respond to this argument, and then what your thoughts are on this topic and these arguments. All right. If you are going with the third option, that would be the critical thinking issue at the end of Chapter 8, which is perspectives on the death penalty. So you'll read the introductory information, then you'll read An Eye for an Eye, The Case for Revenge by Thane Rosenbaum, and you'll answer these 4 questions. According to Rosenbaum, why do most people reject revenge? Second, on what grounds does Rosenbaum question the usual distinction between justice and revenge? 3, according to Rosenbaum, why does justice and the moral principle of reciprocity demand the death penalty for murderers? How does that principle demand the death penalty for murderers? And 4, according to Rosenbaum, why does plea bargaining disrespect the rights of the victim and violate the moral imperative? Then you'll read There is Blood, a Lot of Blood, Very Red Blood by Justin E.H. Smith, and you'll have 4 questions for this one. What are the 2 forms of violence addressed by Smith and how are they related to capital punishment? What event contributed to the decline of capital punishment in Europe? According to Smith, why is capital punishment in crisis in the United States? And then we have, on what grounds is Smith opposed to the executions of, Timothy McVeigh and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber? Why is he opposed to it? After reading both sections, you'll then answer these 2 questions. Identify the premises and conclusions of the arguments from the 2 readings. Evaluate each argument. Which person, Rosenbaum or Smith, presents the strongest argument? Explain your reasoning. And then, should a criminal's level of cognitive development be considered in sentencing? Discuss whether murderers who lack effective critical thinking skills or who are cognitively immature should receive the death penalty. All right, so we got 3 options. Choose the one that interests you the most, the one you think you can provide the most thorough responses to, however you want to decide. Choose one, try to have it in by Sunday night, and definitely reach out if you have any questions.